Thomas Edison, he said, we're going to make electricity so cheap, only the rich will burn candles. We have to do the same again. We have to make clean electricity and clean electric machines so cheap and so easy to buy and install that only the really extravagant people will burn fossil fuels in their daily lives. We thought there was an opportunity in the utility space to provide ordinary customers, homeowners, renters, busy people living busy lives with better, motivating, and actionable information to help them change their behavior and save energy at home. And shortly after we started, both Google and Microsoft started their own energy portals. As a small little company, we were terrified and paranoid that Google and Microsoft were going to compete with us. But they both failed, not because they can't build great software, but because it's pretty hard to get people to pay attention to something they're not paying attention to, even if you're Google and Microsoft.
Well, happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Political Capital. We're very pleased to be here this morning with Mr. Alex Laskey. Alex, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So as a reminder, Political Capital is a conversation series for the Commonweal community that explores the intersection of policy, technology, and finance. And no one is better suited to talk about that intersection than Alex. Alex is the co-founder and executive chair of Rewiring America. He's the former co-founder of Opower, a board member of Arcadia, someone who's operated at the highest levels of kind of startups and policy and advocacy throughout his career. So Alex, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure.
Alex, maybe start by just telling us a little bit about your own background and especially about your experience founding Opower, which was obviously a big part of your early career.
Yeah, I grew up in New York and prosecutor dad and a mother who was a public school teacher, and felt like very early on a commitment imbued by my parents to and inspired by them to do something useful in the world, to have an impact. And in my mind as a kid, I thought that meant going to serve in government or working as a journalist. I never thought that I'd be a business person. I didn't really have much of an opinion one way or the other about business, other than that it was foreign to me and not something that, at least in my younger mind, I conceived as a way to have a positive impact. After leaving home, I went to school, eventually moved out to San Francisco with my then girlfriend, now wife, for her work, and reconnected with, worked on a bunch of political campaigns, lost all of those political campaigns. And then the last sort of political job I had was I worked after a candidate whose campaign I managed. We lost a race, a primary. I did political polling and public opinion research and strategy, and got involved in a whole number of ballot measures and races, and some of those things succeeded in spite of my involvement. And preceding that, but it was sort of further enhanced and encouraged by that. I was becoming particularly interested in issues around energy and clean energy and their implications on climate. I've been an environmentalist conservationist since I was quite young, and so. But this became a real focus area for me, and I had reconnected with a college friend, Dan Yates, who was trained in computer science and was knew exactly what he wanted to do, which was to be a startup entrepreneur, software entrepreneur, and when we left college and I moved back to New York, he moved to California and ended up starting an educational software company that was quite successful. And we became friends again after years apart, and decided that we wanted to work together on something related to the environment. And we had a whole bunch of ideas of what we could potentially do together: for-profit, nonprofit, advocacy, building something, and ended up deciding to really focus on this notion that the company was called Positive Energy at first, but became Opower after we were sued by Oklahoma Gas and Electric, who believed they
Separate
trademarked.
story.
Yeah. Anyway, is it right? Separate story. But our basic idea, and this was in part informed by Dan's experience in educational software, giving better information to parents, teachers, students, and my experience in political opinion research, was that, and a basic optimism about humanity, that if you give people better information, you can appeal to their better instincts, and that the experience of receiving a utility bill is at best forgettable and often aggravating and frustrating. And yet we knew from regulation and policy, in addition to politics, that utilities actually, in some cases, because of wise public utility commissions and state legislatures, utilities actually, their interests were increasingly aligned with the public interest and with their customers' interest in helping them save energy. And yet the bill was, we thought, this wasted opportunity in a world in which every other major industry had already been transformed or was being transformed by information technology. We thought there was an opportunity in the utility space to provide ordinary customers, homeowners, renters, busy people living busy lives with better, motivating and actionable information to help them change their behavior and save energy at home. And so we started the company. It was a terrific experience. It was 10 years of my life, my 30s basically, and we grew to 600 people. We went public. Eventually, the company got acquired by Oracle. I stayed at Oracle for a year. I spent 160 nights a year away from home for 10 consecutive years. And but it was like, a self-actualizing lifetime highlight experience, and made tons of friends and built real relationships. And the company itself, I think there are now 15 couples who met while both employed at the company who are now married, or at least they think permanently partnered. Got
any Godfather requests?
I don't have any. Haven't had any naming rights or Godfather requests. I haven't been asked to pay any school tuitions either. I'm happy to change diapers and read books to kids, but anyway, it was like some of us went into the company married and stayed married. Others, found their best friends and lifetime partners. And on top of that, the thing we started the business for was to have an impact on the industry and on climate. And when we sold the company, we were delivering roughly 5 to 6 terawatt hours, measured and verified terawatt hours of energy savings annually, which is about 1.25 times the Hoover Dam in terms of its impact. The Hoover Dam does roughly 4 terawatt hours a year of electric generation. And now, gosh, how long? It's been 7 years later almost since Oracle bought it. And the company it remains a very prominent and branded division within Oracle Utilities, and is more than double the size in terms of its annual impact. So, that part feels great too. That's what I thought. That was what I thought was why I would do it, was to have the impact. And of course, that remained motivating throughout. But the sort of lived experience of running a company, of building a team, of working with people day in and day out, I think that what I, in retrospect, am most grateful for and most proud of is the set of relationships that were built, not between me and my colleagues, between our clients and me, between other people in the industry, and then of course the ones that had nothing to do with me, but the relationships that were built by those people with one another. So anyway, it was an awesome experience, and sorry for going long on that.
No, it's great. I mean, you were, one of the real early success stories in kind of the, 21st century clean tech world. And it's great to hear the full background. In a second, I want to get to your newest project, Rewiring America. But I'm curious, as someone who himself has, run for office and been in politics and now running a venture firm, I'm curious for your thoughts on your political experience kind of helped tee up the vision for our, to what extent, if at all, did it inform your work? I mean, were there lessons from the political sphere that you brought to kind of being a CEO?
Yeah. Well, two things. One is maybe I misheard you. I never ran for office. I just mismanaged.
No, I know, but just working on political campaigns.
I mismanaged other people's runs for office. And I also, to that end, wasn't the CEO. I was the president of Opower. Dan was the CEO, which was the perfect job for each of us. And Dan, I should say, lives 200 yards in that direction and remains one of my best friends. Not to say that it was always easy for the two of us, but it was great for our relationship. Yeah. So I guess one thing, and I think this is relevant to and why I'm excited, Nate, about Commonweal. And I know this is not a pitch for Commonweal, but I found a couple of things. One, so we were selling to a regulated industry, and when we started the company, there was sort of a joke in the industry, and it remains one, but I think untrue, really, for the most part now, that the only customer that utilities care about is their regulators. And they even refer to customers as ratepayers. They don't refer to them as customers. And so that has, when we started, just as a sort of matter of fact, point on that when we started the company, there were maybe zero, maybe one. I think Arizona Public Service had a chief customer officer, which every other Fortune 1000 company has a chief customer officer, or anyone that has customers anyway. There was one at APS. She refused to meet with us, of course. But by the time I left 10 years later, every utility had and has a chief customer officer, and we were hosting big forums for them. I like to think that maybe we had some impact at helping utilities recognize that there's strategic value in attending to their end customers. But I mention this because for me, for a lot of software tech entrepreneurs, not for Dan, but for many others who don't come from government or political space, the notion of working with regulators, with politicians is only seen as risk. And if you ask the kind of, hopefully this is changing some, but the sort of standard question when you ask Silicon Valley CEOs, or for that matter, Mid-America or East Coast CEOs, what the role of government should be in business. And the most popular answer, maybe not majority, but the plurality answer will be government should get out of the way. And that's, from my perspective, nonsense. But so it made us unusually well equipped. Both my experience, even if it wasn't a successful experience, but my experience and Dan's comfort with the role and importance of government and policymakers and politics made it such that we were unafraid to walk into any room and recognize the strategic value that those policies could have, could provide. So it was super useful. And then, though we started the company in San Francisco, Dan's fiance took a job in DC doing international development work, and he married her in spite of that. So he moved to DC, and then a year later, my wife and I moved to DC. And so we built the company primarily in Arlington, Virginia. We ended up with a large office in San Francisco, 150 people, but we attracted all kinds of really terrific talent who came to us from government or from advocacy organizations or from consulting shops serving the government. And so, it wasn't just me. There were people who had a lot more experience and success in that space who became, who were driven by our mission and worked harder because of it and brought their own perspective and talents to bear on what was ultimately a complicated set of things to go try and do together.
And I remember my good friend Jake Levine worked for you back then, and I was amazed at the quality of the people who you were getting out to leave government jobs, because they were so fired up about the mission.
Yeah.
In a second, I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you want, folks in the audience want to use the raise hand function, just because there are a bunch of people here and want to get some questions in. But before we open it up, Alex, Rewiring, you mentioned kind of recruiting from advocacy organizations. You've now started your own advocacy organization, which I can, from my own experience, know is a very different kind of enterprise than starting a business with its own set of challenges. Maybe give 2 minutes quickly on Rewiring America,
Sure.
and what you got up to.
Yeah, just one reflection on the previous conversation before I get into it. I do think, just to be explicit about it, it is incredible, whether you're based in Arlington, Virginia, or Palo Alto, or somewhere in between. It is really useful to bring different kinds of people with different experiences to the table, and having people either as employees, as board members, advisors, investors, who have relationships with and experience in the policy world, especially when you're building companies that are touching regulated spaces, is invaluable. And people can learn to do new things, young and old alike. And it's like there's an orthodoxy sometimes of like, you must hire somebody who has this exact relevant experience to do the job. And I, that's just my experience couldn't be further from the truth. I would never have gotten hired. I was like a failed political junkie, and I think I ended up being a pretty decent tech entrepreneur. So Rewiring America. So one thing, just to push back on we started with advocacy, or we actually started with research and then advocacy, but we really see ourselves as in the business of market transformation. And there is a market, or rather, like many tiny markets that exist around the U.S. that need to be transformed as we transition our economy from a fossil fuel-based economy to an electric economy. We started the organization. Saul Griffith and I were working with. Saul was an old friend whom I had met through my Opower days traveling. And Saul had done this really foundational research with the Department of Energy to map energy flows in the U.S. economy. And so he had a bunch of incredible data, and we had this joint insight that the way we were talking about combating climate change as a economy and as a society was that it was going to require a ton of sacrifice and suffering. We're all going to have to pay more for less in order to combat climate change. And we thought that's not a real winning message. And incidentally, it also isn't true that I didn't then, but now have an electric vehicle. And for those of you who have one, and I suspect I'm not the only one on this Zoom, I will never, and you will never go back. Not because you're tree huggers, though you may be, but because it's a better machine than the machine you last had. And the same is true for heat pumps, and the same is true for heat pump hot water heaters, and et cetera. The problem is, and not only are they better machines, better performing, more reliable, cleaner air, et cetera, but they also are more affordable to own over their lifetime. The challenge is that there's an upfront capital cost, and you're essentially trading the fuel cost over time for the finance costs upfront. And so we started an organization because we thought we needed to press the case both from a narrative and political perspective, but also that this market needed to be transformed, and new financial instruments needed to be created in order to make it easy and affordable to make it basically Thomas Edison apparently, when the Pearl Street Power Station opened in New York City, it was the first, I don't remember what year it was any longer. It was the first power station in
79, I think.
What's that? 1879? Thank you, Nate. Apparently, and this is apocryphal, I don't think there's a phonograph of him saying this, but he said, we're going to make electricity so cheap, only the rich will burn candles. And we have to do the same again. We have to make clean electricity and clean electric machines so cheap and so easy to buy and install that only the really extravagant people will burn fossil fuels in their daily lives. And we had all these great ideas, but neither of us could see our way out of a paper bag. And we got reconnected with Nate's old colleague, Ari Matusiak, with whom Nate worked, I think, in the White House. Maybe you guys were not overlapped, but and I knew Ari from that time briefly in the White House, and he was sort of swimming around in the same waters we were, and several people suggested that we reconnect. And, we were thinking about starting this organization, but not exactly sure how to do it. And we connected with Ari, who not only is brilliant, but is like organized and disciplined and a terrific leader. And the best thing we've done is convince him to join us as to co-found the organization, and not only to co-found it, but actually to be on the line and leading the organization. So we launched in the summer of 2020 with this jobs report that showed the jobs that could and will be created as we electrify the economy. We gained champions on the Hill, ended up writing in partnership with Senator Heinrich and other legislators, the legislation that became part of the Inflation Reduction Act that incentivizes the electrification of people's homes, makes it easier and cheaper. And now we're organizing the private sector, continue to organize government, and working to help implement IRA, because there's a ton of money out there that is available to ordinary Americans, and we want to make sure those Americans get a hold of it, and it's maximally leveraged. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer more questions on that or anything else. Thanks for having me.
It's amazing what you've built. I think Barney, and then Nisha, and then Maritza.
Well, thank you very much. It's really interesting. I'm Barney Rush. I'm an advisor to Commonweal. A good friend of mine from high school is the mayor of Eugene, Oregon. And you may know Eugene is just trying now with a ordinance to ban connections of gas-fired natural gas going to homes. And the natural gas industry is now replying saying people deserve choice. They shouldn't be forced to electric. They should have a choice. And I think, if anything, the message you're trying to convey is that if people really have a choice, they will, in fact, choose electric, especially if they can really understand all the economics. And so I'm really asking whether, I mean, you don't have to say it, but otherwise just send around a note or whatever. What are some of the best materials that you would recommend that we look at to get at the levelized cost and the value proposition of heat pumps in particular? There, I feel kind of the stickiness is just the fact that so many people have their installed systems. The AC companies know what they do. They don't know the new stuff. And I'm just trying to really get a sense of how deeply you've really gone into that question of how you really motivate the transformation of the existing stock of the way that we heat our homes right now and the speed at which we could convert.
Yeah. Well, first of all, best of luck, and God bless to your high school friend. He's doing the right.
By the way, Lucy Venice is her name.
Sorry, apologies. Not only is the natural gas industry like arguing that people should have choice, but they're spending many millions of dollars in a small town to try and do this. And of course, people do have choice, regardless of what this in this ban. But we have a ton of papers on our website, rewiringamerica.org, which go into the levelized costs and the savings, and not only nationally, but by congressional district, by zip code, or by county rather. Wow. So you can look there. And of course, on top of that, in a place like Eugene, unfortunately, people are installing air conditioning for the first time. I don't mean it's unfortunate that they're doing it. It's inevitable given what's happening to the climate. But across the Pacific Northwest, where there wasn't air conditioning 10, 15 years ago, now new homes are all being built with air conditioning. So and the difference between a central air conditioner and a heat pump is marginal, and especially if you're doing it up front. And so, it's incredibly economic. This is for new buildings that this ban would apply to. It's incredibly economic that you're going to build these new buildings all with central air conditioning, I presume, or with room air conditioners. Those should be central heat pumps or split unit heat pumps. So it's kind of there's a lot to say about this topic, but I think it's quite interesting and instructive. The fossil fuel industry and the gas industry is not going to go away quietly. Meanwhile, from my perspective, there are other paths for them to take, and there's money for them to make in pivoting their businesses. And this transition, even in Eugene, even if and when this measure passes, this transition is going to take decades to occur. And so there will be a ton of work and a ton of money to be made throughout that transition. So happy to go deeper on that, Barney. And we have tons of resources on the website, and let me know if you can't find what you need.
I'll look for it. Thank you.
Nisha?
Hi there.
Hi.
Great to meet you. I know some of your Opower colleagues from previous lives, including Mark Solomon and Nicole Poindexter. So I've followed what you've done for a long, long time. So at Opower, I think one of the things that you were focused on was kind of behavior change, right? And so I'm wondering now, kind of today in Electrify America, like, what are the key lessons learned around behavior change?
Yeah.
And as you're trying to encourage the homeowner, because they're the gatekeeper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can show them all the math and all the rest, but they ultimately have to make the decision to, call up the contractor or to do something different when they're replacing their HVAC or whatever, or remodeling their kitchen, etc. So what are the key pieces that really need to be reinforced around that behavior change, and what are opportunities to kind of partner with other folks who are working on the consumer side of things?
One just quick comment first, which is that, Nate, you should have Nicole Poindexter on, who Nisha mentioned. Nicole is building a microgrid solar company in Sierra Leone and Ghana, Energicity, and she's doing amazing work and changing lives in a really profound way. Mark is also terrific and is back in Rochester, I think, which is where he grew up. So in terms of behavior change, one of the things is to increasingly consumers don't think about their energy consumption unless there's a bill that's surprising or unless the power's out. And so we recognized that the time to motivate behavior change was, we didn't have any particular affinity to utilities, although I now have much more and tremendous respect for them and admiration for them. But when we worked with utilities because they were the ones who had the customer's attention when it came, or had ordinary people's attention when it came to energy consumption. And they had to be a part of the solution. And there were lots of other things, of course, that we did vis-a-vis behavior change, but in some ways, seems obvious in retrospect, but that was the most profound thing we did, was to partner with utilities. And shortly after we started, both Google and Microsoft started their own energy portals to try and attract their substantial user bases to explore and understand their energy use with Google and Microsoft. And both those, we were, as like a small little company, we were terrified and paranoid that Google and Microsoft were going to compete with us. But they both failed, not because they can't build great software, but because it's pretty hard to get people to pay attention to something they're not paying attention to. Even if you're Google and Microsoft. And so, sort of the parallel here is we need to make, nobody, even on this Zoom call, which is filled with kind of like nerdy energy people, I suspect none of you know what brand hot water heater you have. Maybe somebody does, but like go into a movie theater this weekend and ask people, or and they'll tell you stop talking during the movie, but then they also want the answer. And so you need, the way people buy hot water heaters is that somebody in the house says, look, the water's not getting hot for my shower and I need to take a shower. And you call the guy and he shows up and he says, yeah, we need, and you call the guy. The guy is the number, the sticker that was placed on the boiler by the last person who owned the house. And that person comes with a truck and says, here's a hot water heater. And yours is broken. I've got one on the truck. I can install it today. And you say, well, but I heard this guy from Rewire America. I think I should get a heat pump electric hot water heater. And they say, well, those don't really work as well. And you're going to require an electrician to come in here. We can do it, but it's going to take 3 weeks. And you say, I like my hot showers. I'll do it next time. And so there's a lot of things that we are thinking about and we are already beginning to try and implement, but that businesses need to play a role in stringing together these electrification events. So you're not shopping for a hot water heater, but you are shopping for a new car and you're thinking about getting an EV. How do we make sure that when you buy that EV, that you're going to have an electrician come into the house and put in a charger in the garage or in the driveway? How do we make sure that when that electrician comes in, he or she also looks to make sure that there's a 220 outlet plug where your hot water heater is? So when that hot water heater breaks, you're in a position where you said, I heard about that thing from Rewiring America. I've heard about these tax credits. I heard about these rebates. Can I get one? And the guy looks in your wall and says, oh, you've got a 220 outlet. No problem. We'll put one in. So there's that's a good as a single example. But there are a number of things that we're trying to do here and that we could use help on. And there will be new innovative business models that emerge around this in finance and in the equipment changes. One of our colleagues at Rewiring America is an engineer who started a company called Copper, which is going to be induction stoves that use a regular 110 plug instead of a 220 and have batteries built into the stove. And this allows you to install it without having an electrician come in. So, there are going to be innovations in delivery and service. There's going to be innovations in finances, and there's going to be innovations on hardware. And on top of that, we're going to need innovations in local and state permitting and regulation to make it easier, because I don't think, we can't afford to wait until everybody starts paying attention to this. From a behavior change perspective, we have to make it the easiest, most convenient thing to do.
I am so sorry. I really wanted to get other folks in for questions, but
can we take Doug's question? He's been patiently.
Okay.
I'll answer very quickly.
All right. Go ahead, Doug.
So I've been for 17 years. I was on the board of directors of Albemarle Corporation, and before that, Rockwood. And we build it into the world's largest producer of lithium. So I think about batteries a lot. Where are we in the U.S. and outside the U.S. with the ability of the electric grid, basically power grid, to accommodate renewable energy?
I mean, I'm not an engineer, but the data I have seen suggests two things, and my experience suggests a third thing. One is that utilities are good at long-term planning, and this is going to happen over a long period of time, over the period of decades. And it's going to happen in a fairly predictable way, at least over, maybe unpredictable in the near term, but over the long term, it's going to be predictable. We're going to electrify. From our estimation, there are 1 billion machines that need to be installed or replaced that are going to be electric. And so we can build towards that. Another thing is that makes the problem less, so time makes this easier. Another thing that makes it easier is, thanks to your work on lithium, electric vehicles are coming, and they're coming quickly. And in the near term, they potentially represent a risk and a threat to some local distribution networks. But there are 220 million passenger vehicles in the US. They will all be electric. Maybe they will be all electric by 2040. They'll be all electric. They certainly will be all electric by 2045, 2050. 220 million 60 megawatt hour batteries that are sitting most of the time, 95% of the time our cars sit idle, are a tremendous resource. They represent sort of 2 times what the economy needs, sort of 2 days worth of storage. So you could imagine if you have your car plugged in, and in fact, Ford is advertising the F-150 Lightning as a means to back up your house. That's the future we're going to be living in. So it puts a lot less pressure on the distribution and transmission grids if we have the right price signals going to people and to their devices. Then demand side storage and production in cars, in solar panels on roofs, will do a lot over time to make the grid easier to manage and less. We'll still need to double the size of the grid, but there's a lot that can be done on the demand side, and we have to, the work that Opower started and continues to do, and that other companies are doing to help utilities digitize, to help make the grid not just a physical asset, but a digital asset that can orchestrate demand and supply. That work needs to continue, but it can be done.
Alex, Maritza had her hand up. Do you have 2 more minutes?
Yeah, I have time.
Okay.
I took it down just because it was related to air source heat pumps, and you had sort of addressed that. But I could pose it this way, which is there is so much written about the growth in the air source heat pump market in Europe and in the United States, but it remains a pretty complex install and not a practical, not emotional purchase. And I wondered if there were any insights Rewiring has had about how to make the process more standardized or easier, or not, the SKU proliferation, not just on the appliance, but really the installation, makes it tricky to standardize, to make it cheaper, to allow more trades and contractors to add it to their service offerings. So any ideas beyond the education and sales process on the actual install and design process to make this an easier product to buy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and one for which I don't have a straightforward, easy solve. But there are a number of things. One is, ensuring that new construction, and I think whether there's a ban or not in Eugene or elsewhere, new construction is increasingly moving to electric anyway. And so that's going to scale the industry. It's going to scale HVAC contractors, and that's important. But at the end of the day, housing starts in this country go up and down, but they represent a small percentage of the total housing stock, and we need to find ways to retrofit, because by 2050, I don't know what the numbers are, but something like 80% of the homes that exist in 2050 already exist. So we can't just start again. And we got to make sure those 20% that are built in the next while are built in a way that's accommodating and easy. But so I've talked to, first of all, DOE is doing some interesting work. They've issued some challenges, and they have some challenge grants available to help solve this problem. And I don't know, there are companies working on this. There's a company called Gradient, which is Saul helped start the company, my co-founder, but which is how I know about it. But it's a window air conditioner heat pump that plugs into a regular 110 outlet. And is Kigali compliant on top of that, and it's very cool looking. And they just announced a deal with the New York City Housing Authority to put these units into Section 8 and other affordable housing units. I think there are going to be technologies that are developed, but also the other thing is, and I've talked to the largest HVAC distributors in the country, and they have all confirmed the same thing, and the unions say the same thing also, which is if you can give us confidence about where the demand is going to be for these products, we will train the workforce to do the work, and we will deliver the product to do the work. Everybody has this notion if we create work centers, then we'll train people and they'll be ready to do the job. I'm suspicious of that. I think what we really need to do, and what Rewiring is very focused on, is aggregating demand in places. If you aggregate demand in places, then industry, unions, vocational schools together will train the workers to deliver the projects. If you're an HVAC technician with a truck or 2 trucks, a family-owned business, and you're getting 5 customers, 6 customers a year who want to install a heat pump, you're like, that's nice. I'm going to try and talk them out of doing a heat pump, and I'll install a gas furnace. And if I lose half the customers because they're bleeding heart liberals or lefties, I'll lose those customers. I'll have other customers. If all of a sudden it's dozens and hundreds and entire communities of people who are saying, I want a heat pump, that small business owner is going to say, I'm going to learn how to install heat pumps. I'm going to invest in talent and in the technology necessary to do it. So I think I think I'm pretty clear in this case what the chicken and egg is. We need to start with demand. We start with demand, business will solve the problem.
Thanks.
I'm optimistic about it long haul, but it's messy. There's 120 million houses in the US. They're not alike. They're different, and each one is going to require, there are phenotypes, and there's some obviously that are identical to others, but we live different lives.
But it is. I'll say this as we wrap up. I mean, it's amazing how quickly the politics on this are changing. I mean, for New York State to ban gas in all new construction starting 2025 is a pretty major step. I mean, people are very attached to their gas stoves. It's a very sensitive political issue. And yet things are from Eugene to New York are moving really quickly. And Alex, I think you personally and your team at Rewiring America deserve an enormous amount of credit for helping to reshape the politics around this very, very, very quickly. I mean, it's really astonishing what you guys have done, are doing, and I have no doubt will continue to do. So thank you for all that. And thank you for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. And I'm nice to see people whose names are familiar to me and to be with you, Nate. So keep up all the good work, guys.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.